Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, I'm gonna finish mocking up the body of our 62 GMC. If you missed the last episode, I put a link to it down in the description below. The cab is now fully mounted to the 74 C10 frame, so all of the perches are welded in place and it's pretty well secure. At the end of the last episode, I got the front end loosely mocked up so we can see some of this truck's structure starting to come together, and that's what I want to finish over the course of this video because I still have to get the core support mounts welded in and figured out and whatnot, and I want to get the entire bed structure in. So by the end of this video, we should see the entire truck come together, so to speak. This is going to be really important because I got to make sure all of the body is going to line up where it needs to, that we don't have any, weird uneven gaps and whatnot, because after all of this is done, we're going to start moving towards, the powertrain swap and getting all of that stuff test fitted and then blowing everything apart one more time all the way down to the bare frame so we can completely rebuild this thing from the ground up. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a huge thanks to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this build. In short, we're taking the best elements of two old parts trucks that were destined for the scrap heap and elevating our 62 GMC C1000 to a proper Restomod status. One that's reliable, easily serviceable, and of course, fun to drive. So if you haven't subscribed already, be sure to, and make sure that notification bell is turned on because you don't want to miss any updates. Down in the description box, I also have a link to the build playlist so you can go back and check out the episodes that you might have missed. Thanks a bunch, everyone. The first item on my agenda for today is to get the core support mounts finished. Right now, the core support's just sitting on some rubber blocks for visual, and as you can see, I've got a little apparatus going on back here, which I'll explain in just a second, but I'm gonna go ahead and take this time to strip the original frame of the rest of the mounts and stuff that I think that I might use through the rest of this fabricating process. So let's get to it. So to simplify this process some, I'm using a combination of parts from the 62's frame and the 74's frame. So the rear cab mounts are from the 74, the fronts are from the 62, and these are the 62's original core support mounts. Now these obviously don't line up directly on the 74's frame, but it will allow me to use factory mountings for the core support, and basically I'll just weld this to the frame, box it in, plate it in, plug weld it, everything that needs to be done to make sure it's super strong. So I'm using the crane behind me to keep the core support level and to pull it up just a little bit off of those rubber blocks I was talking about earlier, so I can ensure with my level and stuff that the core support's not tilted one way. It can be lined up with the doors and the fenders and everything like that, and then I can focus on getting these mounted and tack welded in place to triple check everything and then go from there. The core support is now fixed in place. It's solid as a rock, or as solid as it needs to be for the moment. I'll do all of the finish welding and bracing once I get all of the front end taken back apart. I need to make the mounts for the front bumper, but for the moment I'm gonna switch gears. We're gonna head to the back of the truck and start figuring out how to get this bed together. this point, the basic structure of the bed is complete, but I am far from finished. There's still a lot of figuring out to do and a lot of fine adjustments that need to be made. Even though the bed is coming together quite nicely, this has not been without its difficulties. I've talked about before, some of the inherent challenges that come with using the 74 frame to mount the 62 cab, because the frame between the 74 and 62 is actually quite a bit different from one another. So it's involved quite a lot of creativity and studying to figure out where everything needs to be placed. So the cab and everything up front, I love it. It's perfect. The back, in order to match, where the cab is located, relative to the frame, I actually have to space the bed up a little bit, which isn't going to be that big of a deal. But as you see it right now, the bed is sitting flawlessly. It is perfect side to side. It is perfectly level and in line with the body lines up front, but I am absolutely thrilled with this so far. It's coming together really nice. Another thing I wanted to make mention of is the bed floor itself. This truck would have originally come with a wood bed floor. It would have been slats all the way across with these little ribs and stuff that hold it all in. We do plan on putting a wood floor back in this, so when it comes to making all of the fine adjustments and stuff, I have to take into account the thickness of the wood too, which is already done right here, but just in case anybody was wondering. As good as all of this has come together, there's a new thing that I'm gonna have to figure out, and that's the location of the rear wheels. Now, when I got everything lined up front, the front wheels are sitting nicely within the fender gap like I had hoped that they would be, but apparently there are enough differences in the wheelbase between a short bed 62 and a short bed 74 that I'm gonna have to do a little bit of customization back here, so to speak. Basically what's going on, the rear wheels are sitting a little too far back. I need to actually put the center line of the wheel in the center line with the tub here. There's supposed to be a bit more gap at the back because of how the tubs, taper off, kind of like how the front fenders do. They got that little swoop to them. So what I'm most likely going to end up doing is relocating the spring perches forward by as much as like 2 inches or so. I still got to figure that out. I already knew I was going to have to get the drive shaft shortened, so that kind of fits in with the whole equation as well. What I'm going to end up doing is filming a dedicated video on all of the rear suspension modifications, because at the same time I'm gonna be lowering the truck probably about 4 inches in the front and 6 inches in the rear to account for the height differences in mounting the cab and the bed, and just to give the truck a little bit more of a cool stance, so to speak, without being too low. I think it's gonna turn out really good, but there's gonna be enough going on back here between all of the figuring out and the customizing, the fabricating and whatnot, that I think it would make a cool video all in its own. So I'll keep you guys up to date on that. Even though I'll be lowering the truck some, it's still important for me in this build to keep most of the serviceable components factory. Therefore, in the process of modifying the suspension, I'll be rebuilding everything using all new bushings and hardware, cleaning and painting everything, replacing all of the braking components, and even servicing the rear end. The thing is, whether I'm looking at brakes, steering, suspension, or powertrain components, I'll be able to easily service this truck by finding parts through acdelco.com, a local GM dealer, or a GM Genuine Parts or AC Delco distributor. Throughout this series, I'll have links down in the description box below that'll list specific parts that I'm using, so you can check all of that out on acdelco.com, or put your vehicle's year, make, and model or VIN number into their parts finder to see what parts they offer for it. My goal is to set this truck up for success over the long term, because most of the serviceable parts that I'll be using are backed by General Motors. This truck will be able to be driven daily or taken on a long road trip without worry. Thankfully, the 74 chassis is already set up pretty good with power steering, power brakes, and a coil-sprung front suspension. The brakes are discs in front and drums in the rear. The setup on this chassis was actually part of the optional heavy-duty brake package that was offered in 74, which had larger brakes in the front and the rear. Being that this chassis was already set up for a small block V8, it'll also be super easy to adapt over to the LS. It's going to be incredibly exciting to see all of this come together. With the majority of the bed structure now complete, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from back there and start working on getting the bumpers mounted. There's still some more work that I have to do with the bed, like getting the tailgate put on, getting the side steps securely mounted in place, and so on and so forth, but all of the bed mounts are now complete, and I'm so proud of how they came out. This is the first time that I've actually done some serious fabricating for a build. I made all of those mounts, and the way I got everything configured, it is so stout. There's extra bracing, there's extra bolts. It's just a really sweet setup. I ended up making all of the bed mounts out of 3x3 box tubing, 1/8 inch thick, and then plated on the top with 1/8 inch thick, just flat stock. And just some of the other hardware that came with like the bed slats and stuff like that, welded it all together and just came up with a cool concoction, and it worked out pretty nice. So anyway, I've been working back there enough. Let's go ahead and turn the attention to the front bumper. If I ever do something like this again, I'll probably make my own new front bumper mounts using the old frame horns as a template, because one of the 62's frame horns was pretty well mangled from an accident at some point, but I wanted to take it as a challenge, so I broke out the torch and welder and wanted to see if I could straighten it and fix it, and honestly I think it turned out pretty good, so I just went with it. With doing this cab and chassis swap, there was no way to use the C10's original saddle-mounted tank, and this is the 62's original in-cab tank, which we didn't want that in there anymore for obvious reasons. What we're going to end up doing instead is putting in a custom fuel cell style fuel tank that's going to sit underneath the bed in this area right here. It's going to be all plumbed up. It's going to have good capacity and all that, so looking forward to getting that test fitted in there, but there's still a whole bunch of additional work to do before that, so let's keep plugging away. One of the electives that I opted to do while I'm working on the back of the truck is to replace the rearmost cross member with one from Tinworks Fabrication. This thing is very stout, thick, nice rolled edges, and it's got a pretty cool design in it. It's meant to be bolt-in, but I'm going to be welding it in place. The main reason for doing this is that it actually relocates the rearmost cross member further back on the frame, so it's going to make a lot more room for the fuel tank we're going to be installing. Setting up the rear bumper was also pretty tricky, but it ended up being easier than the front bumper was just because I went ahead and made my own mounts from the get-go using this plate steel. But basically I've got the mounts welded to the inner frame rails. They're actually bent outward a little bit. I heated it up with a torch and bent it out a little bit so it matches up flush with the inner frame rail and curves out a little bit to match up with the bolt. So got the one brace coming out, and then there's another piece welded this way with a hole drilled through it, and that's where the bolt goes through. I'm going to do the same thing with the outer braces, but I ran out of this steel, so I got to go to the store and get some. But nonetheless, the bumper is mounted and looking great. The only other thing I'm not going to be able to get to in this video is making the step reinforcements. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to use the 62's original bracket, but I'll be able to use it as a template. It's just going to be easier to make my own mounts just with the clearance of the bed and the frame and all that stuff. I really like how the brackets for the rear bumper turned out, so I'm probably going to do something similar here. But again, I got to go make a steel run, so I'll save that for a little bit later. This is the first time in probably about a year that the truck has been this put together. So seeing all of this is such an incredible sense of satisfaction. It really gets my blood pumping. Like I said, this is the first time that I've ever gone this in depth with a build as far as fabrication and stuff is concerned. So at times it has been a little overwhelming, I'm not gonna lie, but seeing all of this come together and how well everything's lining up so far really gets me excited. I can actually see the vision of what this truck is gonna be at the end of the day, and man, it's gonna be so sweet. A big thanks once again to GM Genuine Parts and AC Delco for sponsoring this series. I've got all those links down in the description below, so be sure to check that out. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to do that as well, and make sure that notification box is selected because there's a lot more content where that came from. And one more thing, don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the videos a lot. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.